The wage gap could actually be due to sexism, but due to women's sexism.
Such as
do you want a guy to pay for the first date?
I don't care.
You don't care?
I'll offer.
On the first date with your current boyfriend, did he pay for the date?
I don't know. I think we split it.
Does he ever pay for dates?
Yeah.
Okay.
He asks all the time.
To be
Sometimes
fair,
I'll
it
sneak up
sounds
and
like he's-
force him to pay.
Sounds like he.
I mean,
he's
I'll
not
force
homeless,
myself to
but-
pay. Like, I'll sneak off, be like, I'm going to the bathroom,
Sure.
and then I'll like slip my card.
Let's hear from the rest of the panel.
Yes.
Do you want a guy to pay for the first date?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I've paid for first dates.
Sure,
also.
I don't dispute that women on occasion will pay for a first date. Of all the first dates you've been on, if you had to say like a percentage, what percent of the time does the guy pay for the first date?
A lot of the guys that I date in my personal life are not as financially.
They're broke?
Yeah.
Okay.
Period.
But overwhelmingly,
Sorry, I'm sugar mama.
okay, the majority of the time, do men pay for the first date for you?
Yeah, when I'm going out on there's different levels of guys I date. There's guys that are hot and like fuckboy
Broke.
status. That's the guys that I will take out. But the guys that are more of the husband material, yes, I would have them pay for the date.
Okay. What about you? Do you, when you go on first dates, who pays for the date?
Definitely the men pay
Okay.
for the first date. But it's just the first date doesn't mean he has to pay for any future date.
But of the people you have dated where it went beyond the first date, was there still a pattern of him paying for dates beyond the first date?
I think generally the men would pay for, would have a bigger share of the cost, but also depends on the income level, socioeconomic status of the men I date. So it varies.
Well, you're an attorney. Do you date many men who work at McDonald's?
No.
No. You
But I bet if she met a really hot musician who like played and sang
that's
her
true.
songs, she would totally potentially go out on some dates with him
would you
and pick
marry
up the
him?
bill.
Would you marry a guy who made like $50,000 a year?
I think just from a realistic standpoint, it would be hard to have a long-term relationship because I have a different perception about money. So if I want to go on an expensive vacation, I don't want to cover 100% of the cost for a man who makes a lot less money than I do.
You would want to date a guy who makes maybe about as much as you
Yeah,
or
or
more.
kind of less than me is okay, but at least we need to have like the same perception about money. Like for example, even if I'm dating a super rich guy, but I want to go on an expensive vacation just to treat ourselves, but then he'll be like, no, I want to save the money, even though you make like $1 million a year. So I think it's all about whether your perceptions are aligned.
Okay. What about you? First dates, do you pay? Does the guy pay?
I definitely prefer if the man pays, and if it's a situation where we're splitting or I'm paying, the guy definitely gets docked in boyfriend potential points.
Oh, so if he- so-
he almost gets friend zoned after that.
So let's say you're on a date, you guys went out for dinner, the waiter comes and he's like 2 checks. You're saying you would dock points.
100%. And I think
Would there
whoever
be a second date?
whoever picks the restaurant, and let's say you pick a very, very expensive restaurant, then you should be willing to pay if the other party, when the check comes, doesn't reach for
What
the
about
bill.
you?
I think the man should pay on the first date.
What about you?
All day.
The men should pay.
Felicity, what about you?
Men should pay.
Okay. Well, Maren, you've heard quite a few women here. Are any of you like consider yourself more liberal or feminist, or
I don't consider myself any of that.
or do you consider yourself more liberal or?
I don't think I'm very liberal, a little bit conservative, I would say.
Okay. Well, so, Maren, let's go ahead and just say that there are no liberal women who ever want men to pay for first dates, which I actually think is.
That's definitely.
I think there's actually a lot of liberal women who still want men to
Yeah, of course.
adhere to more traditional dating standards. Hold on, let me
It's
finish.
always nice if a man pays. It's always like, oh, thank you.
Yeah, but do you think men can get away with saying, it's nice when women pay?
Yes.
Well, they can get away with saying that,
It
but
is
can they
nice
expect?
when women pay.
Sure, I'll grant that, but do you think that men can realistically go into a date with the expectation that the woman's going to pay the entire bill?
I wouldn't say anyone should go into a date expecting that someone's going to pay the entire bill. I've only been on a couple dates. I've always said I'll pay for my food. It's a first date. You don't even know me. We might not even get along.
How many first dates have you been on?
Less than 5.
Have you split all of them, or has the guy
Yeah.
ever paid? You've split all of them.
Sometimes they're like, no, please let me pay, and I'm not gonna say no. But I'll say no, I promise I can pay. I don't want you to
Right.
pay my whole bill. We just met. And sometimes they'll be like, it's okay, fine, you can pay. And I'm totally fine paying, and it doesn't mean I'm going to count them out of my life.
Sure.
But
so I guess to just, wrap up on this, the argument that I was making here is that even if there was only, say, 50% of the female population that had a strong preference towards men being providers and for men paying for dates, men paying in other ways, whatever it is, this would actually indicate that there's a mating pressure that exists on men that doesn't exist the other way.
But
so by women's own dating preferences, and this is not just, I think, a social construct, but also I think there's a biological evolutionary basis for women wanting providers. And when you were talking about the days of huts and the days of caves, you know, the men went out and hunted and the women stayed. The men were providers, the men were protectors. I think based on women's own stated, not just stated, but actual preferences as it relates to what they find attractive in a long-term partner, which typically relates to a man who's capable of providing. And you heard it from here. We've heard it a bunch from women on the show. If the guy won't pay for the first date, that's it. I think that
I didn't say that's it. I said he got docked points.
Okay, fair enough. Whatever it is.
You can redeem yourself.
Yeah, I guess
Okay,
also
but he
depends
has
on
to
who else
work
you
harder
are.
in some other metric.
Because anytime
to
you're
make
on a
up for-
first
but hold on,
date,
let me make. That's
it's
fine.
a-
I'm not going to get
genitalia.
into the weeds with you. I'm going to finish my
Do you
point
pay
here.
for the date when you're going out on your first date? Do you pay for dinner?
Yeah, I pay. So the point I was trying to make here is that if women have this mating pressure that exists, that doesn't exist the other way back, like if I'm going to be going out on a date with a woman, there's no world that exists where I'm going to either have the assumption, like women do, or even think it's a possibility that when I go on a date with her, she's going to pay the entire thing. It's dubious if she'll even go 50-50. I've had that's happened, but the majority of the time there is a very strong expectation that men are going to pay on first dates. This is not like some patriarchal system. This is actually a system, hold on, I'll get to you in a sec. This is a system that women enforce. This isn't like men aren't forcing women to have a preference towards providers. I'm sure men would like be super enthused if women were just simping for them all the time and just like, here's money, taking them on dates. The reality is women place a mating pressure on men that doesn't exist the other way. And there's plenty of other factors, but I think looking at this alone would explain any supposed or alleged wage gap that exists. Because if essentially it boils down to this, women are saying, you can't have sex with me, you can't be in a relationship with me, you won't be able to reproduce, which is like a biological imperative for both sexes, but as it relates to men.
We all need each other for sure.
But if women are basically saying, I won't date you, I won't have sex with you, I won't give you my time, I won't give you my attention, I won't give you children down the road, essentially, because dating leads to relationship, leads to marriage, leads to children, seems like that's a really big mating pressure on men. So if men like somewhere back, either it's in their conscious or subconscious brain, are thinking, if I don't have a high-paying, high-status job, and that's going to prevent me from getting a partner and getting a woman and eventually having children, I think that would be a massive motivating pressure that women are putting on men that would lead them to greater motivation and greater achievement and ultimately greater earnings. So the earnings gap, the wage gap, whatever you like to call it, is actually explained by women's sexism. Go ahead.
If I understand where you're coming from. However, if you take what you're saying and put it towards the history of the world, let's just talk about the U.S. for a second. The history of the U.S. 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, 10s.
What about it?
Men had the jobs and women often did not get hired. Women often had no job. Women often were not invited to have a job. And women often just weren't even allowed to have a job. Their job was to find a man, get married, and have children. So
women have always worked, but okay.
But what? In like a small factory for a penny an hour while men were in like actual jobs?
You think in the 1920s there were like an abundance of cushy jobs? Like 99%, hold on, 99% of men had like and they had super dangerous
and
jobs.
women weren't allowed to work in those jobs even
Wait,
if
let me
they
ask you a
needed the
question.
money.
No, that's fine. Let me ask you a question. You're living
But can I
in
finish my thought?
One quick question, and I promise I'll let you finish.
Okay.
You're living in 1930s, 1920s Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
With the coal mines.
Right.
You have a choice. You can go into the coal mines as a woman. You can be the
I?
first. Well, hold on. I'm
Flashdance
asking.
is my favorite movie, so.
Okay, great.
Well.
So.
Pittsburgh, totally.
Great, thank you for that non sequitur. So, anyways, let's say you had a choice. You could go into the coal mines
Okay.
and get black lung
Yeah.
and die like in your 30s or 40s of lung cancer.
Totally. Or
you could stay home and be a homemaker. Which would you prefer?
which was I allowed to do?
No, which would you prefer?
If I was broke, probably a coal miner. Because
Answer the
people
question.
no, that's my answer.
No, but hold on. Answer the question. If you had the choice, and here are your two choices, to be a homemaker and your husband goes into the coal mines, or you get to go into the coal mines and I guess your husband stays home. I don't know what the deal is.
But the problem with your question
What's the problem with the question?
is that women back then did not get a choice.
Okay, sure. I'm going to grant.
They were told you can't work in this coal mine. Too dangerous for you. Too whatever.
I'm
no,
not sure.
they were told your job is to be a homemaker.
To be
even if you
fair,
don't have kids.
sure.
No. Even if you don't have kids, your job as a woman is not to work in some sort of a physical demanding job. It's not to be a CEO. It's not to be anything. But it's not to be anything that involves work. Women do not really get jobs. You can be a receptionist in the 50s if you want. But other than that, women were not given the choice. Even if you're a single woman by yourself with no kids who needs money because you're going to be homeless.
Are you going to answer
were
my
not,
question,
I'm
though?
answering right now.
You're not answering
You
the
were
question.
not given the choice to work.
Women did have the choice to work, and they did work.
Barely.
What do you mean,
like
barely?
Triangle Shirtwaist Factory? Like, it was not a situation where lots of women were available to work. And so, through generations and slow decline, where women were slowly able to work more, it was still a very normal, like almost taught thing for women to not work. And nowadays, it's so much common for women to work, which is great.
Sure.
However,
Do you want to answer the question, though?
what is it?
Okay, if you had the choice between being a homemaker or working in a coal mine and like
In
dying
what,
of
1920s?
emphysema in your 40s,
In
and like,
1920s?
Sure,
I
1920s.
wouldn't get the choice. That's my choice.
let's say you did. It's a hypothetical.
If I begged and pleaded,
It has nothing to do with begging
I would pick
or not.
the coal mine.
You know what? They're putting out the coal mine's putting out a program. They're like, we're going to hire one woman, so you do get the choice in this
I would
hypothetical.
want to work.
You'd prefer to work in the coal mine than be a homemaker.
Yes.
Really?
If I was by
Okay,
myself
all right,
and I
there you
didn't
go.
have money and I needed money to live,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I'd rather
That's
work in the
not-
coal
that's-
mine.
That's not really the purview of the hypothetical. You're
But
adding
the
other.
hypothetical doesn't make any sense.
I'm trying.
If I had the
point I'm
choice
trying
and
to
my
make-
life was perfect, obviously I wouldn't want to work in a coal mine. But back then, there weren't that many options. And if I was a poor woman who didn't have a source of income, who didn't have a husband, I would much rather work in a coal mine than sit in a house by myself. A house I couldn't afford because I didn't have a job, because I wasn't allowed one. I would have to marry a man. That is my job. Back
so
then.
throughout all this claim that women weren't allowed to work through history is just demonstrably false. Women have always been able to work.
But what, out of 100 women, 10 women could work?
All women could work,
No.
but many women opted. It was just the sort of.
You're so wrong about that.
How am I wrong?
Because women were often never hired, and if they were hired for much less money than they deserved.
What evidence do you have for this?
History books.
Okay, let me ask you a question, and I want to move off of the wage gap here pretty soon.
My grandpa was a coal miner, so just let you guys
Okay,
know.
thank you
I
for
just
that.
heard that. I was
Yeah.
like, there's my time.
If it was actually the case that women were paid more than men, what's actually stopping companies? And you would agree that companies, their goal is to make money?
Okay.
Like, do you think
Yeah,
most
capitalism society,
Do you think?
yes.
Would you agree with me that corporations are extremely greedy,
Yes.
and their primary goal is to generate profit?
Yeah.
Like, you would agree that you might say that corporations, like there is sexism in corporations. You'd probably argue that because men occupy the highest positions in these corporations, like they're part of the executive team, they're part of the board, whatever, the CEOs, et cetera. You would say that there could be sexism in these corporations.
There could be.
Right. Or you probably say that there is. So, but you would agree that also corporations' primary motive is profit and money.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So do you think that corporations prioritize their alleged or supposed sexism over making money?
No.
Okay, so then if that was genuinely the case, that you could genuinely get away with paying women less, what is stopping from corporations just exclusively hiring women and saving like 30% or 20% on their payroll expenses and beating out their competitors by only hiring women?
Because men believe that men make more money and men are better at their jobs. So a CEO man who is sexist, I mean, I don't know these people.
But you're saying it's the case that women are just as good as men?
Yeah.
Okay. So then if that's the case, if that's your worldview...
That's mine. That's not a man's. That's not every man's worldview.
Okay, so but what is, again, if it's actually true that you can get away with paying these women 30%, 20%, why don't the companies just hire women?
Because they don't like women.
But I thought profit was the ultimate motivator, not just like boys club sexism.
Yeah, but they're scared they're going to get a what's it called? A lawsuit. They're scared they're going to get a lawsuit, a sexism lawsuit, an ageism lawsuit, a pregnancy lawsuit. They're scared.
There's literally women. There's gyms just for women out here in the valley, and men sue because they can't come in. So like, people sue all the time.
It's.
Well, I guess you're not hypothetical
in
situation.
You're not supposed to discriminate.
If you can bring in a male CEO who is known for discriminating against women and ask him these questions and he gives you real answers, I'd love to see that. However, they're all going to tell you bullshit.
What are they going to tell you?
That the men they hire are just great and they didn't mean to discriminate and they didn't mean to do any of this stuff. But it's hard to get the truth out of these people. But if you look at everything.
I mean, the thing is that this wage gap thing, it's been legislated against since the 1960s. So if you can prove as a woman that there is an actual discrepancy between wages between your male coworkers, you can bring a lawsuit.
But that's the problem, is people do things so secretively now. Ageism, racism, sexism, all of it.
But okay.
That can be done in such ways where it's avoidable to be sued against.
I think, look, ultimately...
It's definitely not as bad as it used to be. I'm not saying like the sexism in the workplace is as bad as it was in the 60s or 50s. It's way better now, and I'm so grateful that it's better now. However, it still exists. And acknowledging that it's still, even if it's like only 5% exists, it's still there.
So you're saying 95 cents to $1? I don't
know.
What do you think is the number?
I don't know.
Well, you said there's a wage gap. You would have to articulate what that is.
It depends on each person.
What do you think about Google, for example? They did this internal audit hoping to reinforce some of this feminist nonsense, and it actually found that they were overpaying women.
Okay.
So would this be evidence of sexism against men?
Yeah, they can take it down. They can do whatever they want.
Why were they paying more women before that? Like, because the men were... Okay, so they were paying those women more because priorly they were not paying women properly. So they're going to overcompensate that time because women were not getting paid a lot. So then when they want to look good, they want to look good to society.
No, I'm asking, did they find out why they were overpaying women?
The CEO of Google was a woman.
Well, wouldn't you, hold on. So what do you mean by why?
I mean, did they say like, oh, we accidentally did this, or were they doing that on purpose?
Well, let me ask you a question. What would it actually matter if it's on purpose or not?
Because if they accidentally said, oh, all these women's performances were just better and we gave them raises and we didn't realize that it was only women, then
wouldn't that have to apply the other way towards men too?
Yeah.
But you would make the claim if like there was actually merit for the men being paid more for whatever reason that is, you would probably make the argument that would be due to like sexism and the wage gap.
You can't say probably. If a company showed proof that all the men were working harder and doing better than the women, I would have zero problem with the men being paid more than the women of that company.
Wouldn't you just argue that, oh, it's just the boys' club?
Wouldn't I just? It depends.
Well, isn't that the basis of your whole argument?
Everything just depends, though.
Okay, everything just depends. So if it's the case that you found a company where, the men were making 10% more, you would probably say there must be a wage gap due to sexism.
Well, what is
but
it?
if the women...
Is it every single man of the company, even one who has no position that's better than a woman, and the women are making less than the men who they're higher than? Maybe then it's worth looking into. But if it's a very obvious just distribution of wealth, like the men are actually doing better than the women, and some men are getting paid less, but some women are getting paid more, but most men are getting paid more, then you can say, it's the company's job to pay who's doing better.
So you do acknowledge there are scenarios in which the men are genuinely doing better, ergo they deserve to be paid more?
Yeah, I've never said that's wrong. It's when a company pays men who are even doing worse than women way more than women, then it's a problem.
Well, how would you establish that?
If they can show proof.
And in which case I would agree with you, they could bring some sort of sex discrimination lawsuit. Okay. But it's not clear to me if that's even happening like on a wide scale.
Okay.
Again, look, I can only repeat myself here at this point. The wage gap is simply argued away. It's an earnings gap. It simply compares all the earnings of men to all the earnings of women.
But I'm not talking about the earnings gap.
Okay, you're talking about the wage gap?
Like if a man and a woman apply for the exact same position, the payment difference. I'm not talking about more women don't have jobs than men, and women make less than men overall per capita of the entire U.S.
Yeah, couldn't you see a difference between two men, though? So, for example, one of the men negotiates for a higher salary than the other man does.
Same job?
It's same exact job, but wouldn't you agree that there's a component of the company's going to make you an offer and then there's going to be a negotiation? Some people might not even negotiate and they're just going to take the first offer that comes to them.
Which goes back to her point about women stereotypically don't know how to negotiate for themselves and ask more. Some men who maybe weren't raised with a good relationship with money, or how if their parents weren't wealthy, they don't know that they can negotiate for more. So it is all based on, I think, how you were raised.
But also a lot of the time, women who speak up for themselves are told that they are like aggressive and disrespectful and rude. And whereas men who speak up for themselves about money are like ambitious and awesome and they're going for it, So it's just, there's so many different factors.
I got to read a couple chats here. We do have to move it on.
From the freaky men.
Oh, from the freaky men.
Freaky men.
Where is
Felicity, are you able
Andrew?
to read these?
Chair 1.